Hi, I'm Debbie Gamble. Trust is a big word. Trust unifies our families, our communities, and even the way that we're governed. And in a world of smartphones and screens, how we build and maintain trust is changing, and it's changing fast. So I'm talking to people at the forefront of what trust means now. I'm excited to be talking today with Anne Connelly. Anne is an educator and a thought leader in blockchain and social innovation. Recognized as one of CBC's 12 young leaders changing Canada, Anne has lectured at Oxford on innovation and impact finance, and also teaches at Singularity University and Boston University. She is the co-author of Trust, a graphic novel, and of Bitcoin and the Future of Fundraising. Hi, Anne, and thanks for joining us today to explore the topic of trust.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I like to start these conversations with the same question. So how would you define trust?
For me, trust really is the glue that binds a society together. So it's really necessary for people to have trust to be able to build relationships slowly over time, whether that's between people or between themselves and a corporation or with their government. And so trust for me really is the foundation of the society that we live in. And when I look at trust, I find that it's changing, and what that means is changing over generations. So when I talk to my parents' generation, they have trust in corporations that have big, well-known brands that have been around for a long time. My generation, less so. You know, we don't care so much about your brand. We care how many 5-star ratings do you have on Google or on Amazon? What does the crowd around me think about, this particular organization and whether it's trustworthy? And I think that again is going to change, with the generation after myself to see how they trust, different institutions or different individuals in the space. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out moving forward into the future, especially as we weave in other technologies like AI and we start to have more robotics that are a part of our society, and just look at, what does that mean in a future where humans are one part of a society, but there's many other creatures or objects or individuals, let's call them, as we move forward. So I don't know how that compares to your view on trust and what that looks like to you.
Of course, it's a really important dynamic to every society, and the way we interact at Interac, the way we look at it is it's part and parcel of pretty much everything we do. For us, it's about the engagement that we build with Canadians and the services that we offer to Canadians, for them to not just go about their daily lives, but to have meaningful connections. That for us, there's really kind of the 3 legs of the stool, which is authenticity and authentic engagement. And, for the tech audiences, that might be verifiable credentials. And the second leg of the stool is inclusivity, being inclusive with the audience, ensuring that, we can think about everybody. And it's only then that you can actually really, when people are involved, that you can design the best possible outcomes. And then the third leg of the stool from a trust framework for us is about relevance. Right? So it's about the relevance to the needs of the community, and whether that's in verification and authentication to enable new experiences. And I think the notion of trust is core to pretty much everything we do when we start to embrace the ideas of the technology, and hence why we wanted to kind of, talk to people like yourselves around how you think about this. You've got a fantastic background at Singularity University. You engage with leaders around technology, in particular, the impact of exponential technologies and how it can solve some of the biggest problems that we're faced with. So perhaps we can kind of look at that a little bit more. And let's start with, what is exponential technology?
Exponential technology is really just Technology that grows on a predictable pattern. So typically it doubles in a particular time frame. So obviously we've heard of Moore's law and computing power, how it doubles about every 18 months. But the really important part is just the predictable nature of it. And so that we can look at, where is this technology going to be in 5 years and be able to know, okay, this is what we're going to have to work with 5 years from now. So let's start building applications knowing that that level of technology is going to come. So we see this type of pattern with everything from AI, VR, blockchain. You can look at quantum, nanotech. There's all sorts of different ones. And, we even saw that exponential curve with COVID, where no one really thought it was going to be as bad as it was because humans think on a linear scale. And we just weren't able to really appreciate, when it doubles every, few days or whatever it is, just how bad it could get. And so I like to look at exponential technology from the more positive side is if we know that, this is where blockchain is today, but this is where it's going to be 10 years from now, we can really imagine a world in which, that technology is going to help us create better outcomes for people in society or, create the better business outcomes, whatever it is that you're curious about. And so just making people aware of what the world is going to look like maybe 5 or 10 years down the road with these technologies is going to help us to actually appreciate what we can do with them and then what type of outcomes that we might be able to achieve.
I love the quote from Ernest Hemingway around exponential change being like bankruptcy. It happens very slowly and then all at once. So, Anne, where do you think technologies like this can make the biggest difference?
For me, what gets me most excited is the impact of technologies on, the long tail of the curve. So people, maybe they're LGBTQ plus, maybe they have, they're neurodivergent, maybe they're, living in a place that is very unique. For them to be able to make connections between these communities through, digital organizations or any way that they can sort of feel like they're a part of something really important and have been able to find their people, I think is really what gets me most excited about technology. I think, we talk a lot about authenticity. And when you look at Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and I feel like there's a crisis in authenticity in our generation right now, where everyone is encouraged to be as fake as possible to get likes. And what I'm hoping we'll see is that people will be the most authentic version of themselves and they'll be included as a result of that. So if you have, if you're autistic, maybe you're masking or you're hiding some of your tendencies. But in our future society, I would love to see you just be who you are and have society, recognize that as a great thing. And that to me is going to help, everyone just be more comfortable with who they are and have a society that's much more accepting of people who are different.
And I think that this notion of authenticity is very important to trust. So it's around, are we confident in the engagement? Are we comfortable with, having that digital relationship? Do we know who's on the other side of that relationship? And I suppose not just who, but in the future, the what, right? It's not just going to be that human interaction. Just to add to that, I think there is another side to this, right? So exponential technologies, in a positive light, can be the source of great productive change, but they also have, the dynamic of exponential technologies. Usually it's very complicated, right? It takes us a while for us to kind of get our arms around what this actually means. So as we kind of tie this back into the topic of trust, when you think about exponential technologies, what do you see in terms of what they can do to help enable, the notion of trust in the future?
I mean, my passion is obviously the blockchain sector, and trust is one of the biggest topics. And it really looks at how our entire society is built on these trusted, centralized intermediaries. So whether they're banks or governments or corporations. And when we start to see if you can't trust those intermediaries to do what they're supposed to do, then the fabric of society really starts to erode. And that's what we're seeing with blockchain, with this type of decentralization. So moving away from this need for these centralized parties, you don't actually have to have that trust anymore. Blockchain provides that transparency for you, to enable you to transact in a more peer-to-peer fashion, which is going to just change so many things in the way society operates and subsequently create these incredible outcomes for people, particularly in emerging economies. If you think about the banking sector in a lot of locations, there's a huge proportion of the world is unbanked or underbanked. And so they don't have access to these services. But the really neat thing about cryptocurrencies is they're totally permissionless. So, with a bank, you could show up, say, I want an account, and they could just say, no, we're not interested in you as a client. And that's it for you. There's really no recourse. But with cryptocurrency, anybody can participate. And so that's really exciting for, anyone with a mobile phone and an internet connection can have access to an entire financial world that they didn't have access to before.
I think really this is about accessibility, isn't it? It's about, the notion of how do you leverage this great technology and make sure that everybody has access to it, whether it's for financial services, or, certainly in our case, we're looking at Interac. We're kind of doubling down on this idea, and talking about leveraging some of these capabilities for verification solutions, which for us is really a pathway through to digital enablement. And I think really the breadcrumbs to a vibrant, prosperous digital economy. So maybe you can just perhaps touch on some of your experience in other markets as to how that's been achieved using technology.
The first example that really comes to mind is actually healthcare. I think we're seeing a lot of challenges in the Canadian system these days. And that's primarily because so much of our healthcare is based on, in-person, sort of old-fashioned style models of operation. But if you can look at, okay, from an African perspective, which is I worked in Central African Republic and DR Congo, to get qualified medical staff to some of the most remote locations is very difficult. But if you can roll out telemedicine, you can have a qualified doctor who's sitting in Johannesburg who can see patients all day long, or just in his spare time, if that's what's the only time that they have. And then you can take it a whole step further, where you've now digitized the care, but you've got these big telemedicine units and cameras and clinics. Well, get rid of the units, put it on your phone. So then you've got refugees or people who are mobile, they can access a doctor anywhere that they are in the world. And then all the resources that, would have gone to these clinics maybe can go to other things like training, more tertiary level care providers. How then does the idea of trust in the medical system change when we're eliminating maybe things that are familiar or comfortable, or eliminating the human element, incorporating more of these sort of digital or new technologies that we might not be as familiar with or comfortable with?
We had the privilege recently of talking to Zaina Kayans, and she shared with us a pretty interesting stat of 25 to 40% of everything done in the healthcare industry today is considered wasteful, duplicative, unnecessary, or harmful. So if you kind of think about how we can leverage some of these solutions, some of this exponential technology and verification services, how much more efficient we can be, and how much better the service would be if we can make it more accessible and relevant to the users. So let's talk about the other side of some of these exponential technologies, and think about the difficulties and the challenges in building trust, confidence, and in some cases, convenience in leveraging some of these capabilities. And we've seen, a lot of noise in the marketplace recently about confidence, etc., in technologies like blockchain. How might we overcome some of that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting month in the blockchain space, that's for sure, with
Mhm.
everything happening with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried. I think the most interesting thing that comes to me about all of that is FTX was probably one of the most regulated parts of the cryptocurrency space. And so there's a lot of talk in the media and, in my networks, and they're saying, well, we need to regulate crypto more. And I'm like, if this was the peak of regulation and it failed astronomically, versus, if you're looking at decentralized finance, they're not regulated, and you don't get these cases of people running off with hundreds of millions, or in this case billions of dollars. And so I think we really need to think about what is the end result that we want to achieve. And if that's a case of not wanting people's funds to get stolen, or not to avoid money laundering, or to, make sure taxes go to the right place, keep that in mind, and then build, what are the protections and how can we create those protections. But the answer is not necessarily more rules and more regulations. Maybe it's actually more technology. And again, that sort of comes back to this idea of then how do you trust in this technology? I mean, we've seen incredible cases around AI where they've put dirty data in, or data that is accurate but is historically biased, against, say, female engineers or women of color, in science or something like that. And so it's really about how can we ensure that anything that's been programmed is actually not biased and harmful in a way that actually is detrimental moving forward. And I think that's going to be a key discussion is, how do you prevent? And then on the backside of that, if something happens, how do you get recourse and what does that look like? So, for example, if you have a self-driving car and it gets in an accident, can who do you take to court over the death of the pedestrian or whoever? Is it the programmer? Is it the owner of the car company? Is it the person sitting in the car? And I think there's a lot of really interesting ethical questions that we don't necessarily have the answers to yet. And so that's going to be something we'll have to look at very closely. I think, in the coming year or two, because of that exponential curve, where we think these questions are 5, 10, 15 years out, but they're really not, because the pace of technology is changing so quickly. We're going to see these real life cases in our laps, I think, very, very soon.
Yeah, I agree. And it is certainly about how do you distill down some of those core, and in some cases quite sophisticated, complicated sets of technology to some simple data sets around so that people can understand. So yeah, I think that notion of simplifying the complexity and thinking about it so that it is applicable to everyday usage. So you can build that behavioral change. You can get the best out of the technology. You recently wrote a graphic novel about this, right? So you've obviously been thinking about all these elements of trust. What were you thinking about around how can you share this with the community, and what were you trying to accomplish, I suppose?
The idea came up about 3 years ago, and it really came from, when I would go to these different crypto events, they were very white and they were very male. And I just thought, there's so much untapped talent, particularly in, African countries. And if we could just get them excited about blockchain, get them, aware of it, that, we would have the potential to bring a whole new diverse set of individuals into the space. And, one of the best ways that I've found over time of helping people understand this technology is storytelling. Is not so much this is how it works specifically, but more this is the change it's going to create in the world. And so I partnered with a friend of mine, Chief Nyamweya, who's a celebrated graphic novelist in Nairobi. And we came up with, just an exciting story. It features two female protagonists. And so we were able to sort of create this world that young Africans, particularly Eastern Africans, would be able to see themselves in. And so we wove the blockchain education through it, showed the characters sort of using cryptocurrency, creating a decentralized organization, changing the governance of the community around them. really with the goal of drawing on how governance was done by their ancestors and historically before the colonial powers came in and sort of broke everything apart. And so we produced the graphic novel. It launched in September of this year. We had 2 sold out screenings to the motion comic version in Nairobi, and it's free to access on trustgraphicnovel.com.
What a wonderful way to, convey the capabilities, right? And I like the kind of combination of traditional and new, right? So storytelling, particularly graphic storytelling, is the history of humanity, really, and combining that with telling the story about applicability of the new technologies. Again, kind of embraces that notion of inclusivity and touches on what is relevant to that particular audience. So let's turn our sights to the future. When you think about the future and this kind of capability, how do you think about trust?
So when I think about industries being able to incorporate many of these new technologies, I think we're not looking at this incremental levels of change, this sort of 10% better. I think we're looking at let's wipe the slate clean, rebuild from scratch, and build something incredible that looks nothing like what we had before. And there's real pros and cons to that. I mean, the pros is that everything's going to be so much better. The cons is that change is really hard. And people are going to be uncomfortable with that. Power structures might be dismantled. So there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. And so in terms of trust, it's really going to be, oh goodness, it's going to be really hard. I think, I think it's going to change a lot. I think we're going to maybe hopefully go back to trying to create scenarios where you have deeper human connections with people in your local communities where you live. And then, these great online communities that have been created, how can we create more trust in those? Blockchain is playing a big role in that in terms of decentralized organizations and transparency there. But then again, it's how at the end of the day, how do you trust in machines, and that these machines or computer programs have our best interests at heart. And I don't know how to fix that problem. I think that's just going to be one we're going to have to figure out as we go. And maybe the answer is just that the outcomes surpass expectations. But there's going to be, a lot of challenges to get to that place. And so it's really about, do we have the faith, I suppose, to power through some of the issues that will inevitably happen on our path to this new way of working, so that we can reap the benefits on the other side.
I love the idea of the potential for deeper human connections. I think that's going to be cool to how the future actually plays out. So thank you for that. We close these conversations with a handful of rapid fire questions. If you're ready for that, okay.
I'm ready.
So the first is complete the sentence. Trust is just another word for
human connection. Absolutely.
The second one, the most trustworthy person I know is.
I don't know. I don't know how to answer this one. Part of me wants to say like myself, because I can always depend on myself. But then I think, there are people who know me better than I know myself, so maybe they're better able to predict what's going to happen.
I like your idea of trusting yourself. Why not? We certainly have the technology to enable that. So that is really verification, right? So why not? And the third question on our rapid fire is, what's one thing an organization could do to quickly earn your trust?
For me, it's all about dependability and doing what they say they were going to do. So it's really honesty, authenticity, and just never having to worry that they're going to be there for me.
There's that word again, authenticity. I think that's going to be so core to the future. And thank you so much for talking to us about the pretty impactful term of trust. Your experience is really insightful around how we can get our arms around the technology and apply it, not just to our developed world reality, but also in hopefully enabling some developing nations to embrace this technology to prosper as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.